They said the billionaire's twin girls would never see the world, that light was something they'd only feel, never witness. But then he arrived, a quiet man with calloused hands, a haunted past, and a daughter of his own. No one expected a miracle, least of all him. If stories of unexpected kindness, healing love, and second chances touch your heart, then you're in the right place. Take a moment to subscribe to our channel, where every story is a reminder that even in darkness, the light can find its way in. Now, let's begin. Vivian Hale's mansion had 34 windows, each framed in gold lacquered oak and washed by the sun every morning. Yet inside it remained dim and silent, like a grand piano, left untuned, full of beauty but hollow in sound. The echo of her heels on marble was the only noise in the corridor. Outside, gardeners trimmed hedges shaped like swans. Inside, the only movement was the faint flicker of dust dancing in shafts of light that the twin girls never saw. Miss Ellie, the nurse, whispered gently, adjusting the child's cardigan. "Would you like to feel the flowers again?" Ellie tilted her head, smiled softly, and turned her face toward the window, though her eyes were clouded in stillness. Across the playroom, Sophie sat, cross-legged on the floor, humming a tune no one recognized because it was not from a radio or memory, but from somewhere inside her. Vivian stood behind the glass door, watching her daughters, 7 years old, born into privilege, beauty, and darkness. The world called her a visionary. Forbes had labeled her the Ice Empress with a heart for philanthropy. Her late husband, Richard, had called her sunshine in a bottle. But since the twins were born blind, since that hospital room grew quiet, and doctors used the words congenital optic nerve hypoplasia, Vivian had not felt like light nor royalty, only quiet and tired. She didn't cry anymore. She ran foundations, opened schools in Guatemala, donated millions to blindness research. But at night, she would sit in the twin girls' room and whisper stories they'd never read with their eyes. Her voice cracked when she said things like, "The castle was made of gold, and the stars looked like silver freckles in the sky," because her daughters didn't know what gold looked like, or silver, or freckles, or stars. She turned from the playroom heels soft on the rug. Her assistant Marjorie met her near the stairs with a clipboard. "The new maintenance hire is here, ex-military, Jack Morrison." "Shall I send him around the back?" Vivian paused. "Does he have experience with children?" "No, ma'am. But he came highly recommended, honorably discharged, and he brought his daughter with him. Said he had no family to watch her today." Vivian's brow furrowed. Children weren't typically part of her staff's entourage. "Fine, keep them out of the main wing, just for today." The truck was nothing special, an old forest green Ford with faded stickers and a dented bumper. Jack Morrison stepped out in boots, dusty from somewhere far, with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His posture was military straight, but his expression belonged to a man who'd stopped expecting warm welcomes. Beside him, a girl with honey blonde hair and a stuffed raccoon clutched in her arms skipped forward. "Ruby," he said gently. "Stay close. I'm not a baby," she grinned, but immediately returned to his side. Her eyes lit up when she saw the mansion. "Whoa, is this the White House?" Jack chuckled under his breath. "No, but probably just as cold." By noon, Jack was already fixing a broken light on the eastern patio. He worked with precision, quiet, methodical. Ruby sat cross-legged under a tree nearby, reading a picture book to her raccoon. Vivian stood on the second-floor balcony, arms crossed, observing the strange sight below. She'd seen men like him before, disciplined, capable. But it was the tenderness with which he handed a sandwich to his daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, that struck her. For a man of war, he moved with surprising gentleness, Still, she turned away. One day. That's all he would last. The mansion had a way of expelling anything soft. At 2:47 p.m., Jack was asked to check the heating vents in the north corridor. To reach it, he passed by the playroom. The nurse had stepped away momentarily, and the door was cracked open. Jack paused. There in the golden quiet sat two girls identical in face, but utterly still. They were humming in unison, rocking gently. One turned toward the window, her unseeing eyes tracing the warmth on her skin. Jack didn't mean to interrupt, but something in his chest stirred. He stepped in slowly. "Hey there," he said gently. The twins stopped humming. Silence fell like a dropped blanket. Jack crouched. "My name's Jack. I'm just fixing things around here." "This your music hour?" Sophie nodded. Ellie clutched a plush rabbit tighter to her chest. He pulled out a small penlight from his utility belt, a reflex maybe more than thought. "Mind if I?" he asked, holding the light low and soft. Not towards their eyes, just in the space between them. Sophie blinked. Jack leaned in. Her eyes twitched, following the beam only for a moment, but it was enough to freeze his breath. It could have been imagination. Or coincidence. But to a man who had once dragged injured children from rubble in Kandahar, he knew what involuntary reaction looked like. He stood up, unsure what just passed through his chest. Behind him, the nurse returned and looked at him with surprise. "Sir, this is the children's area, please." Jack nodded, murmured an apology, and stepped out. But as he walked back into the hallway, the thought pulsed louder than his boots on marble. She saw something. Even just a flicker. He looked back once. The girls had resumed humming. But Jack Morrison had felt something shift. Not in the light. Not in the room. Inside him. The next morning, Jack Morrison woke before the sun. Old habits were hard to break. His daughter Ruby was curled under a knitted blanket on a pull-out cot in the maintenance wing. Her stuffed raccoon, Sergeant Wiggles, poked out from the crook of her elbow, like a sentry on watch. Jack brushed a kiss across her forehead and quietly brewed the tin of instant coffee he always carried. The mansion's luxury appliances meant nothing to him. He preferred what he knew. Simpler things. As the steam curled up from the metal mug, Jack's mind drifted back to the playroom. The little girl. Sophie. Her eyes had followed the penlight just for a second. He was sure of it. But could it have been wishful thinking, muscle memory? A coincidence. He had seen hundreds of cases on the field, trauma nerve damage soldiers, who'd lost sight, then regained it after targeted therapy. Civilian medicine often gave up too early. He pulled out a tiny notebook from his jacket pocket and scribbled one line. Sophie. Left eye photoreactive response. At 8:15 a.m. sharp, Marjorie Vivian's assistant met him in the courtyard. "Ms. Hale requests that you check the irrigation line near the guest greenhouse. We've had low pressure since the last storm." Jack nodded. "I'll get on it." "And please." Marjorie gave him a once-over. "Don't wander." Jack gave a polite smile. "Copy that." The greenhouse was tucked near the edge of the estate, a glass cathedral wrapped in climbing ivy. It was peaceful here, nothing like the military barracks he'd grown used to. He knelt beside the irrigation control box and began checking the valve connectors. But his thoughts weren't on the pipes. They were on those girls, on their humming. On the way, Sophie tilted her head toward the light. He heard footsteps, light and quick. "Hi again," came a chipper voice. Ruby stood there with a juice pouch in hand and dirt on her jeans. "Where's Sergeant Wiggles?" Jack asked without looking up. "Overseeing tea with 2 squirrels. It's top secret," she sipped. "Daddy, can we go see the girls again?" "The singing ones." Jack froze. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Ruby, we're not guests here. But they're lonely. I could tell. They liked my humming. And one of them touched my hand when I was leaving." She didn't even flinch when I said I'm missing a front tooth. Jack smirked. That's classified information. Ruby nodded. Then maybe they're trustworthy. By late morning, Jack had fixed the irrigation valve, rewired a faulty panel near the eastern stairwell, and replaced 2 light bulbs in the west gallery. Vivian Hale hadn't appeared once, but as he walked back toward the maintenance shed, his boots slowed near the playroom door. He didn't plan to stop. He told himself to keep walking. Then he heard it laughter. Clear ringing alive. He hesitated. Inside, Ruby sat cross-legged on the plush carpet telling the twins a story. So then Sergeant Wiggles parachuted from the highest tree, landed in the cake, and yelled, "Mission accomplished!" Sophie giggled. Ellie gasped. What color was the cake? Ruby paused. Chocolate on the outside, blueberry inside, and gold stars made of sugar on top. There was silence, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but thoughtful. "Is gold warm?" Ellie asked. Jack's throat tightened. Vivian stood across the room watching it all, her arms folded, but her expression unreadable. He cleared his throat softly. "Sorry, ma'am. I told her not to wander." Vivian didn't speak right away. She stepped into the room. "Your daughter has a vivid imagination." Jack nodded. "She gets it from her mother." Something in Vivian's face flickered. Jack started to usher Ruby away, but Sophie suddenly said, "Can you tell me what gold looks like?" He turned. "Gold," Sophie nodded. Jack crouched. "It's like the warmth of the sun, but in color. Like light you can touch, like a campfire, only softer." Sophie tilted her head. Ellie chimed in. "And does it shine in the dark?" Jack smiled. "Only if you believe it can." Vivian's breath caught. The man hadn't just described a color, he'd built a bridge between their darkness and imagination. For the first time in years, she didn't interrupt. That afternoon, Jack sat alone in the staff break room eating a turkey sandwich on rye when Vivian entered. She rarely stepped foot in this part of the mansion. Her presence shifted the air like a sudden draft. "You were in the military," she said. Not as a question. Jack stood. "Yes, ma'am. Air Force Pararescue. 12 years. And now?" "Janitor." He nodded without offense. "And father. Which is more important?" Vivian sat across from him unexpectedly. Her posture was perfect, but her eyes studied him. "My daughters have been seen by every specialist, flown across oceans. Nothing worked." "I don't believe in false hope. I don't offer any," Jack replied calmly. Vivian's voice softened. "Then what do you believe in, Mr. Morrison?" He paused, looked out the window where the sun hit the glass just right. "I believe that sometimes light finds us in the quiet, and healing starts with someone noticing the small things no one else sees." Vivian said nothing, but her fingers resting on the table curled slightly like someone holding on. That night, Jack added a new note to his notebook. "Vivian, not as cold as she pretends. Sophie, second light test needed." He turned off the lamp, but he didn't sleep quickly. Because for the first time, this job, this mansion felt less like a paycheck and more like the beginning of something. It began with a whisper. Not from the wind or the trees outside the greenhouse, but from a little girl sitting cross-legged beneath the stained glass skylight, whispering to a stuffed raccoon and 2 nearly blind girls who had never seen sunlight or stars or sugar-frosted cakes, but now leaned forward, listening like they might. Jack stood just outside the archway, tools in hand, watching through the crack of the door. The morning had started with routine repairs, a leaky faucet, a squeaky gate, but now he was frozen. Not by duty, but by something else entirely. "Magic," Ruby whispered again, this time into Ellie's ear. "Did you know," she said softly, "that sunbeams are like golden ribbons you can only catch with your smile?" Ellie let out a small laugh, uncertain, but enchanted. Jack tilted his head, smiling. That line. He remembered it. He used to whisper it to Ruby when she was 4 and afraid of thunderstorms. Now she was passing it forward like an heirloom of light. Sophie reached toward Ruby's voice, her fingers grazing the edge of her friend's sleeve. "Tell me more," she said. Vivian Hale stood nearby, arms gently folded. She wasn't watching the girls. She was watching Ruby. And Jack. Later that day, Jack knelt near the base of the fountain in the courtyard, re-securing the marble lion head that had shifted loose in the storm. His fingers moved with practiced calm, but his mind buzzed. Something was happening. These children, his and hers, were unraveling each other's loneliness. Not with medicine, not with machines, but with sound, with touch, with stories, with belief. He wasn't supposed to intervene. That was the rule. But what if the rule was wrong? In the late afternoon, Jack brought Ruby with him to restock the tools in the shed. She skipped beside him, humming the same tune the twins had hummed the day before. That wordless melody that felt old and sacred and somehow familiar. He waited until they were alone, then asked gently, "What were you whispering about this morning?" Ruby glanced up with the innocent mischief only a child can wear honestly. "Just secrets. Good ones. The best kind." She nodded. "Ones that make people less scared." Jack knelt down eye level with her. "You like those girls, huh?" She nodded. "They're not broken. Daddy, they just don't see things the way people expect." Jack felt a tightness in his chest. "I know." Ruby hesitated. "Daddy? Yeah, I think one of them saw me today." His heart stopped for a beat. "What do you mean I was waving my raccoon?" Ruby said earnestly, and Sophie turned her face to me, not just to the sound. She looked where I was. Jack tried to keep his voice calm. "Are you sure she smiled like she knew?" "Not guessed. Knew." Jack swallowed hard. A part of him didn't want to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what they stripped out of you in the battlefield when the helicopter stopped coming. But Ruby's eyes were shining with certainty. He exhaled. "Thank you for telling me." "You think it's a miracle?" she asked. He thought for a long time before answering. "I think it might be the beginning of one." That evening, as the last light faded across the estate, Jack sat alone in the garage workshop, reviewing blueprints for the electrical grid. He wasn't looking at them. His notebook lay open beside him. He added a new line. "Sophie, increased visual response per Ruby. Investigate controlled light stimuli." He flipped back a few pages. Past scribbled notes from Afghanistan. Past field sketches of injuries, makeshift treatments, post-trauma therapy drills. He found one old dog-eared page, Dr. Lorne Beckett. Visual neurology, Fort Carson VA Clinic. A ghost from his past. A man who once treated children injured by debris, who believed light could return when guided with patience and personalized sensory triggers. Jack tapped the pen. He needed to call him, but not yet. Not without certainty. He closed the book and stared at the wall. Not every man got a second war. But maybe he'd been given a second mission. Upstairs, Vivian walked into the twins' room in her bare feet, something she hadn't done in years. Ellie and Sophie were lying in bed, giggling about something, only they seemed to understand. Vivian sat between them and ran a hand gently across Ellie's hair. "What made you girls so happy today?" Sophie whispered. "Ruby told us what the sun feels like." Vivian smiled. "And what does it feel like?" "Like when someone hugs you after a bad dream," Ellie said dreamily. "But bigger." Vivian closed her eyes. And in that moment, for the first time in months, she felt her daughters weren't just existing. They were becoming. Later that night, Vivian stood in her study staring at the portrait of her late husband above the fireplace. "Richard," she whispered. What would you think of all this?" The man in the painting didn't answer, but his soft eyes seemed to echo a permission she hadn't asked for in years. She turned to the window. In the courtyard, Jack was walking with Ruby under the stars, his hand wrapped around hers, like she was the most precious treasure in the world. Vivian exhaled slowly. There was still distance, still lines uncrossed, but something had changed. Maybe it started with a whisper. Maybe healing always did. The morning sunlight poured through the grand windows of the east wing, filtered through lace curtains and flowering vines. It cast a warm, dappled glow on the playroom floor, like scattered halos, waiting to be noticed. Vivian stood silently in the doorway, coffee cooling in her hands. Inside, something extraordinary was happening. Ruby spun slowly in the center of the room, arms out toes, pointed in awkward but determined grace. Her pink sneakers squeaked against the polished hardwood. She hummed a slow waltz, eyes closed, moving not with precision but with purpose. Sophie and Ellie stood just a few feet away, each holding one of Ruby's hands. They weren't dancing exactly, but they were moving. Small steps, gentle sways, timid at first, then bolder, like they could feel the music in their bones, even if they couldn't see the room around them. Vivian's breath caught. No one had told them to do this. No one had given them choreography. They were simply following something invisible, something called joy. And the sunlight, it followed them. Left. Right. Turn, Ruby whispered. Sophie giggled as she nearly bumped into her sister. Ellie laughed and tightened her grip on Ruby's hand. "Are we doing it right?" Ellie asked. "You're perfect," Ruby whispered back. Outside the room, Jack watched from the hallway. He'd paused halfway through replacing a light fixture when he heard the humming. And then, when he saw the three of them moving in unison beneath the beams of gold, he couldn't look away. Vivian turned her head slightly and saw Jack standing there, his expression soft, but unreadable. Their eyes met. She said nothing. But this time, she didn't look away. After lunch, Jack approached the window where the twins sat in their reading corner, fingers tracing raised letters of a Braille storybook. Ruby was with Marjorie in the garden, giving the staff a few blessed moments of silence. "Hey, girls," Jack said gently. Sophie perked up. "Hi, Mr. Jack." Ellie smiled. "Did you see us dance?" He chuckled. "I did. You two made the sunlight jealous." They giggled. "Can I ask you something?" Jack crouched beside them. "When you were dancing, did you feel the light? Not just the warmth, but the direction of it." Sophie tilted her head. "I felt like something was beside me, not touching me, but near me." "Me too," Ellie said. It was like the air was glowing. Jack's breath slowed. He carefully reached into his back pocket and pulled out the small flashlight again. But this time he didn't turn it on. He handed it to Ellie. "This is the same one I used the other day. You remember?" Ellie nodded. Her small fingers curled around it, curious. "It's not on right now," he said. "But hold it. Feel its weight. Where would you shine it if you wanted to find Ruby?" Ellie paused. She turned her head and pointed the flashlight slightly to her left. Jack blinked. "Why that way?" he asked softly. "Because that's where she laughs," from Ellie said. "And I think light likes to follow laughter." Jack swallowed hard. That evening, Jack called an old number. The line crackled. A voice answered. Rough. Familiar. "Beckett. It's Morrison." A long pause. "Well, hell, you're not dead." "Not yet," Jack said. "I've got a case, 2 kids, congenital blindness. But I saw something. Reflexes. Light reactions." Beckett whistled. "How old, 7? Twin girls. Location private. Off the books for now. But I need your opinion, maybe even a consult." Beckett's tone changed. "You serious about this, Jack?" "I've never been more." Another pause. "Email me everything you've got." Videos if you can. I'll take a look. Jack closed the phone, then exhaled slowly. This wasn't about a hunch anymore. This was about possibility. Vivian found Jack in the courtyard just after sunset, sitting alone on a low stone bench beneath the maple trees. "You're quiet today," she said. Jack looked up, surprised. She wasn't usually the one to approach him. "Just thinking." "About what?" He hesitated. "Hope." She raised a brow. "Dangerous subject." "I used to think so too," he replied. "But now, I think hope just scares people because it dares them to believe again." Vivian sat beside him, leaving a careful 2 feet of space between them. "I watched my daughters dance today." "I saw them too," Jack said. "They weren't following music. They were following something inside them." Vivian looked down at her hands. "I forgot what their laughter sounded like. It used to echo through the nursery when they were babies. But after the diagnosis, after Richard's accident, everything became hushed." Jack didn't speak. He let the silence breathe between them. "I don't know what you're doing," Vivian finally whispered, "but I know it's changing something. Not just in them. In me." He looked at her gently. "I'm not doing it alone. Ruby's part of this. So are you." She gave him a rare smile. Not wide, not confident, but real. For the first time, the distance between them didn't feel cold. It felt like the quiet space between 2 dancers just before they move in sync. That night, under the soft hum of the hallway lights, Jack opened his notebook and wrote just 1 line. Today they danced with the sun. And somewhere in the house, 3 little girls dreamed in colors they'd never seen. Vivian Hale stood at the top of the grand staircase, arms crossed, unmoving. Below, she could hear faint giggles. The musical sound of children playing something that used to haunt her in its absence now returned light and alive. It should have brought comfort, but it didn't. Not fully. Not yet. The girls were changing. Sophie had begun turning her head when someone entered the room. Ellie no longer recoiled from windows. They were smiling. More, sleeping easier, humming melodies she had never taught them. And all of it, every unexplained shift, seemed to orbit around him. Jack Morrison, the janitor with the soldier's eyes, the single father whose child moved like sunlight itself. Vivian walked slowly down the stairs, heels soft against the rug. Each step pressed like a question. What if this was just another illusion, another false hope, wrapped in charm and coincidence? She had lived through enough promises to know how brittle they could be. In the parlor, Marjorie was arranging fresh-cut lilies in a crystal vase when Vivian entered. "Is Jack with the girls again?" Vivian asked, voice calm but clipped. "Yes," Marjorie replied without looking up. "He's helping them build a wind chime out of old silverware." Vivian raised a brow. "We have music therapists for that." "None who've made them laugh like he has," Marjorie said softly. There was no malice in her tone, only observation. Vivian paused. "Do you trust him?" Marjorie looked up now. "I think the real question is, why don't you?" Vivian didn't answer. She turned and left the room. By late afternoon, the clouds had rolled in. A quiet storm was building more wind than rain, the kind that makes old trees sigh. Vivian found Jack in the east garden, kneeling by a bucket of tools. The girls were inside napping, and Ruby was reading on a bench nearby. "I need a word," Vivian said. Jack stood wiping his hands on a rag. "Of course." Vivian motioned toward the greenhouse. "Walk with me." They strolled in silence, the glass panes above catching the dull throb of the coming rain. Leaves shivered. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like a giant turning over in sleep. Finally, she spoke. "My daughters have been poked, scanned again. I've flown them across continents, consulted the top neurologists. You think I haven't prayed? You think I haven't tried?" Jack didn't answer. He simply listened. Vivian's voice cracked just slightly. And now, in less than 2 weeks, they're dancing, laughing, turning toward sunlight, as if their eyes remember something science says they shouldn't. And all of this began when you arrived. Jack nodded slowly. You're wondering if it's real? I'm wondering if it's safe, she said. He turned to her fully now. You think I'm selling hope? I'm not. I've seen war zones. I've seen real darkness. And I've seen kids survive it with less than your daughters have. Vivian's eyes flashed. Don't mistake their condition for weakness. I don't, Jack said calmly. I think their world is just quieter, but not empty. Silence stretched between them. Vivian looked away first. Ruby said. Sophie looked at her. She admitted softer now. Not turned toward her voice, looked at her. Jack nodded. It happened. And not just once. I saw Ellie follow the light across the floor yesterday. She said it felt like warm music on her skin. Vivian's voice wavered. That's poetry, not proof. Jack stepped closer, but respectfully kept his distance. I'm not asking you to believe in me. I'm asking you to believe in them. Vivian blinked once slow. Did you contact someone, she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. An old colleague, Dr. Lorne Beckett, retired VA neurology consultant. He specializes in trauma-based vision suppression and cortical rewiring. Vivian's brow furrowed. You think their condition could be reversed? I think their diagnosis may not be the whole story, Jack said. And Dr. Beckett's the only one I've ever seen pull off miracles in hopeless cases. Vivian crossed her arms. You should have told me first. I was going to. Once I had something worth bringing to you. She looked away. Do you want to see the data I've been collecting? He asked gently. Or would that make it all feel too real? Her lips parted to speak, but no words came. After a moment, she shook her head. No. Show me. That evening, Jack sat across from Vivian in her private study, a place few were ever invited. His spiral-bound notebook lay open between them, filled with days of notes, sketches, time logs, and a crude but detailed diagram of sunlight patterns across the playroom floor. Vivian flipped through the pages slowly. Each entry was dated, timed, notated with care. Her daughters weren't numbers, but these numbers whispered stories. Tiny pupil movements, directional reactions, emotional cues linked to specific auditory tones. You did all this, she asked quietly. Jack nodded. Ruby helped. She notices things most adults miss. Vivian looked down at the most recent page. Sophie turned toward flashlight beam during dance. 2.3 seconds. Unprompted. Your daughter believes in miracles, Vivian murmured. Jack smiled. Because she's seen them happen. Vivian closed the notebook. I'll allow the consult with Dr. Beckett. On one condition. Jack straightened. Of course, you're there for every step, every test, every explanation. If this goes wrong, her voice caught I can't explain another disappointment to them. Jack's voice was steady. Then we won't promise anything we can't deliver. We just offer the chance. Vivian nodded. For the first time in years, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled like someone who had been holding her breath through seasons. You're not what I expected, she said. Jack shrugged. Neither are your daughters. The rain arrived quietly, no thunder, no drama, just a slow, steady hush against the windows, like the house itself was being sung to sleep. Jack stood in the hallway near the back stairwell, flashlight in hand, waiting for the power to return. The generator had kicked on 15 minutes ago, but only for the essential circuits. Most of the mansion remained in half shadow, lit by emergency bulbs and the occasional flicker of candlelight. Ruby sat on the bench near the landing, wrapped in a wool throw. Eyes wide in the dimness. You okay, Bug? Jack asked. She nodded. It's cozy like this. He smiled. That's one way to look at it. Then she whispered, "I hope the twins aren't scared." He paused. "They're used to the dark," he said quietly, then immediately regretted how flat it sounded. Used to the dark, as if that made it easier. He stood up. "Come on." The twins' bedroom door was slightly ajar. Inside, Vivian sat at the edge of Sophie's bed, her silhouette outlined by the glow of a single battery-powered lantern. Ellie was curled under the covers, staring into space, her fingers lightly drumming on the edge of the blanket. Jack knocked gently before entering. Ruby followed closely behind. "I thought I'd do a light check," he said softly. Vivian nodded without looking up. Her expression was distant concern etched in the corners of her mouth. "Girls," Jack crouched beside the bed. "I brought my flashlight." "Want to help me find the moon?" Sophie stirred. "It's raining." "True," Jack said. "But if you close your eyes, and we make the light just right, we can pretend it's moonlight." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his small pen light. Not bright. Soft. The kind of beam used in field hospitals when every second of darkness mattered. He turned it on, then aimed it low across the floor. "Can you see it?" "Sophie." She sat up slowly. Her eyes didn't move at first, but then they blinked, tracked, just a little. Jack didn't speak. He let her follow it, let her mind connect what her body might not yet remember. Ellie shifted next. She pointed a finger. "There." Jack moved the light. "You're right. That's where the moon is hiding." Vivian was frozen, breath held. Jack handed the flashlight to Ruby. "Your turn." Ruby beamed. She stood, raised the light slowly, carefully, like a torch in a cave. And then something almost imperceptible happened. Sophie turned her face, not toward the sound of Ruby's footsteps, but toward the beam itself. Not fully, but noticeably. Vivian let out a tiny gasp. Jack looked at her but said nothing. 10 minutes later, the room was filled with makeshift shadows cast by flashlights, a phone screen, the glowing tip of Ruby's toy wand. The girls giggled as Ruby narrated a fairy tale about the lantern night and the forest of rain. Once upon a time, Ruby whispered dramatically, there were twin princesses who lived in a castle where the sun was shy. But then one stormy night, a brave knight arrived with a flashlight sword. Sophie interrupted. "Was he handsome?" Ruby snorted. "Totally. And also, kind of grumpy." Vivian laughed, a sudden unguarded sound. Her hand went to her lips as if surprised it escaped her. Jack just smiled. Ellie pointed at Ruby's light again. "That one feels brighter." Jack nodded. "Because you're getting better at noticing it." Vivian looked at him now. Really looked. He wasn't a miracle worker. He didn't wear a lab coat. But he carried something most people left behind in war zones and grief belief. Not in medicine. Not even in miracles. In people. Later that night, Jack stood alone outside the side porch, rain falling gently onto the stone steps. The world smelled like cedar and wet soil. Peaceful. Real. Vivian stepped out behind him, arms folded, a sweater draped over her silk blouse. "I forgot what their laughter sounded like in the dark," she said. Jack glanced over. "It's louder than most." She smiled. "You know I used to read books about blind poets, artists who painted without sight. I thought if I filled their world with achievements, it would make the pain quieter." "And did it?" he asked. "No," she whispered. "It just made me lonelier." They stood in silence for a moment. Vivian added, "You didn't tell me you fought in Kandahar." Jack shrugged. Didn't seem relevant. I think everything's relevant when it comes to understanding someone. He nodded slowly. "Fair." Vivian's voice softened. "Do you ever miss it?" "War, no. Purpose." Jack looked at her then. Every day. They held each other's gaze for a moment too long. Not romantic, not yet. But raw. Real. Unarmored. I'll call Dr. Beckett tomorrow, Vivian said. I want him to see what I'm seeing. Jack nodded once. I already sent him preliminary notes. He's curious. Good. She turned to go, then paused. Jack, yeah, thank you, for bringing the moonlight back. And just like that, she was gone into the dark hallway, lit by nothing but a small, steady glow at the end. The next morning, the rain had gone, leaving behind a dew-kissed hush across the Hale estate. Trees shimmered with droplets. The stone path in the garden steamed under soft golden light. The world felt freshly unwrapped. Jack was in the side courtyard early, mending a broken gate hinge, when he heard a voice behind him. Low, clear, unmistakably hers. Would you join me for tea? He turned. Vivian stood beneath the awning dressed simply in a navy blouse and slacks, her hair loosely pinned. She didn't look like a billionaire. She looked like a woman trying something brave. Jack wiped his hands on a towel. Tea, she nodded. It's not poison. I wasn't worried about poison, he replied. I was worried it might be Earl Grey. Vivian smirked. It is, he sighed. I'll make an exception. They sat in the conservatory, sunlight dripping through the ceiling glass, warming the small table between them. The teapot was ceramic, painted with wildflowers. Ruby had clearly helped set it. There were mismatched cups and a paper napkin tucked under Jack's saucer that read, "No burping." Jack chuckled as he read it. Very diplomatic. Ruby takes her etiquette seriously, Vivian said, pouring for both of them. They sipped in silence for a moment. It wasn't awkward. Just cautious. Like two people walking across a bridge neither had tested yet. Vivian was the first to speak. I used to drink this with Richard on Sunday mornings before the world remembered we were billionaires. Jack looked up. He was a pilot, right? Yes. Air Force. He flew cargo missions in the Middle East, came from nothing. Built Hale Foundation with me from scratch. He was the dreamer. I was the realist. Jack nodded. That sounds familiar. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Your wife? Jack leaned back. Emily. Kindergarten teacher. She used to draw suns in the corner of every note she left me, even the ones that said, "Please buy toilet paper." Vivian smiled, surprised at the way grief could feel. Gentle in the right hands. How did you lose her? She asked softly. Breast cancer, Jack said. Stage 4. It was fast. Too fast for a man trained to fight battles with protocols and plans. Vivian lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. I was angry at everything for a while. The military. God. Myself. And now Jack looked out the glass panels toward the garden, where Ruby and the twins played beneath a tree strung with wind chimes they'd finished that morning. Now, he said. I try to let light in through the cracks. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. Do you ever stop missing her? Jack thought carefully. I stopped missing her voice, but I never stopped missing who I was when she was still alive. Vivian's throat tightened. She set down her cup. After Richard died, I convinced myself the only way forward was to control everything. If I couldn't protect my children's eyes, I could at least protect their world, their schedule, their therapy, their silence. And did it help, Jack? Asked gently. Vivian gave a weak smile. No. It just made me unreachable. Jack didn't press further. He didn't need to. Some silences didn't need to be broken, only held. Later that day, Jack returned to the playroom to find Ruby teaching the twins how to fold paper stars. They're like little wishes, she explained. You make a fold, then you tuck in a dream. Ellie frowned. What if I fold it wrong? Then you dream again, Ruby said matter-of-factly. Jack stood in the doorway, unseen, heart full. For months after Emily's death, Ruby had withdrawn into silence. No tantrums, no tears, just a quietness that frightened him more than any battlefield. Now, here she was, being the light for others. Maybe that was what healing looked like, not forgetting, but transforming. He turned, almost bumping into Vivian in the hallway. She smiled. I was just watching too. She's good with them, Jack said. She's good for them. They stood in silence. Then Vivian said something unexpected. Will you stay? Jack blinked. What? After this project ends, she clarified. After the gate's fixed, the lights repaired. Will you stay as something more permanent? Jack studied her face. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't even a job offer. It was vulnerability, plain and unguarded. For them, he asked. For them, she confirmed. And maybe for me. Jack looked back toward the playroom. Sophie was laughing now, full-throated and fearless. Ruby was tossing paper stars into the air like confetti. Ellie had just folded one perfectly. He turned back to Vivian. I'm not going anywhere, he said. That night, as Jack tucked Ruby into bed in their small quarters near the West Wing, she asked, Are we going to live here forever? Jack kissed her forehead. I don't know about forever, but for now this feels like the right place. Ruby nodded sleepily. I like it here. It smells like cinnamon and rain. He chuckled. That's oddly accurate. As he turned off the light, she mumbled, I think this house is waking up. Jack paused, then whispered, I think you're right. The sound of tires on gravel broke the quiet, mid-morning hush. Jack looked up from the porch steps, setting aside the wooden planter box he'd been repairing. A black SUV rolled through the wrought iron gates, unmarked, sleek government issue without screaming it. Vivian emerged from the foyer just as the vehicle came to a stop. Her arms were folded across her chest, but not out of defiance, out of preparation. Is that him? She asked. Jack nodded. That's him. Dr. Lorne Beckett stepped out tall and lean with silver hair cut close and a gait that had once belonged to a soldier. His eyes scanned the estate like it was a battlefield he was already mapping. No handshakes, no greetings. Just a curt nod and, let's get to work. Vivian blinked. Direct. Jack smirked. Told you. In the sunroom, the girls waited on the oversized couch, both dressed in their favorite soft dresses. Sophie in lavender, Ellie in blue. Ruby stood behind them protectively, her hands on their shoulders like a little general overseeing her troops. Dr. Beckett crouched slowly before them. No white coats, no big words. He said, his voice low, unhurried. I just want to see how you see the world. Sophie tilted her head. We don't. Maybe not like most people, he replied. But let's test that. Shall we? He didn't pull out machines. No wires, no needles. Just a small briefcase. And from it a curious collection of items. A flashlight, a bell, a velvet pouch of scented beads, a mirror. Vivian watched from behind the glass wall, arms still folded this time to keep herself from shaking. Jack stood beside her. He's not like the others, Jack said. He's quiet but methodical. He doesn't assume he knows. He listens. Vivian didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on Sophie, who had just laughed at the sound of a bell chiming behind her. She turned her head, not just toward the sound, but toward the hand that held it. Beckett made a note. Ellie was next. He took her hand gently, let her feel the heat of a filtered lamp, then slowly passed his fingers between the light and her skin. Her eyelids flickered. Jack leaned closer to Vivian. Did you see that? She nodded. After 2 hours of gentle tests, pauses, and notes, Beckett packed his things and excused himself to the study. Jack and Vivian followed him in silence. Once the door closed, Beckett pulled off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and said what neither of them expected. I've seen worse. Vivian blinked. Worse, Beckett looked at her. Your girls are extraordinary. Whatever diagnosis you were given, optic nerve hypoplasia, complete visual impairment, it may not tell the whole story. But Vivian started. There are signs of neuroplastic response, micro movements in tracking warmth detection, partial pupillary reflexes. It's not full sight. But it's something. Jack exhaled slowly. Could it be trauma-related? Possibly. Could be developmental delay. Could be a combination. But what I do know, Beckett paused, looking at them both, is that they're responding to light. And more importantly, they're responding to trust. Vivian swallowed hard. So, what are you saying? Beckett leaned forward. I'm saying there's a window, a small one. And if we act carefully with the right environmental support, no stress, no pressure, just consistent exposure, we may see improvement. Maybe even vision. Vivian gripped the back of the chair in front of her. Jack spoke what she couldn't. What's the risk? False hope, Beckett said, expecting too much too soon. But there's no surgical danger, no invasive procedures, just time, attention, and a belief that their brains still remember how to see. Vivian finally spoke. We've spent millions on the world's best. None of them saw this. They weren't looking the right way, Beckett said gently. She looked at Jack, and for once she didn't seem like a woman afraid of disappointment. She looked like a mother who wanted to believe. Let's do it, she said. That evening, Vivian joined Jack and Ruby in the garden for dinner under the maple tree. The twins had fallen asleep early, exhausted, but giggling from the day's excitement. The garden had transformed over the past weeks. It wasn't just the lights strung along the branches or the new rose beds Ruby helped plant. It was the sound of wind chimes, the soft music that played during dusk, the laughter echoing off stone walls that had long forgotten joy. Vivian poured Jack a glass of lemonade and passed him a plate. Do you ever stop wondering if you're dreaming? Jack smiled. Every day feels like a maybe. She looked at him across the table. I used to think healing came from control, order, wealth. Now I think it comes from interruptions. He raised an eyebrow. Interruptions. She nodded. People like you, like Ruby. You interrupted my grief. Jack leaned back, eyes soft. Well, if it helps, you interrupted mine too. They ate in quiet for a while, watching the twilight melt into stars. Then Vivian asked, do you think they'll really see Jack? He didn't answer right away. I think they already are. She smiled, not because she was convinced, but because for the first time in years, doubt and hope were holding hands in her heart. And it didn't feel wrong. It felt right. The girls began waking earlier, not because anyone asked them to, but because morning had become a friend, not a stranger. Each sunrise was no longer a concept explained through metaphor or warmth on skin. It was something to chase, to feel, to test. Every morning, Ruby led Ellie and Sophie to the east window of the sunroom. The girls would sit side by side, their hands gently resting on their laps, as Ruby softly described the sky. Today it's orange like my jelly sandals. Now it's turning pink like strawberry milk. And in those quiet, holy moments, Sophie's head would tilt, her lashes flutter, and Ellie would raise her hand to where the light stretched across the marble floor. They were not just imagining anymore. They were recognizing. Jack watched it all unfold from the side, never intruding. He kept his notes, times, reactions, sensory triggers. But more than that, he kept his awe. One morning, as he scribbled something in the corner of his notebook, a small voice startled him. You're writing about us, aren't you? He turned. Ellie stood a few feet away barefoot, her head tilted in his direction. He smiled. Guilty. Why, she asked. Because you're teaching me things, Jack said gently. I can't see you, she whispered. He crouched. That's okay. Sometimes people look right at each other and still don't really see. Ellie smiled. I hear you, though. Then you know the most important part, he said. In the main house, Vivian was changing too. She moved differently now, slower, softer. Not because she was hesitant, but because she was present. For years, she had walked like a woman, always late for something important. Now she lingered in hallways, stood beside doorways, listened to her daughters laugh, and didn't immediately check the time. Even Marjorie noticed. One morning over tea, she leaned in and said, "You're smiling with your eyes again." Vivian laughed. Don't be poetic before caffeine. But the truth was, Marjorie was right. Something inside her was unclenching. Not because of a medical breakthrough, not even because of Beckett's report, which now detailed measurable response to visual stimulus. No, it was because she saw her daughters trying. And that kind of effort, brave, determined, joyous, could only come from belief. That afternoon, Jack was in the music room restringing the old grand piano with Ruby by his side. Dust motes danced in the sun, and the air smelled faintly of wax and citrus oil. Vivian stepped in barefoot, holding a tray of lemonade and sandwiches. Jack looked up surprised. "We didn't order room service." Vivian smirked. "I've been demoted to kitchen staff." "Better than CEO of silence," he said, half teasing. She laughed, sat beside Ruby, and passed her a cup. "Did you know your dad plays piano?" Ruby gasped. "You do?" Jack looked instantly sheepish. "A little. Not since—" He trailed off. Vivian didn't press, but Ruby did. "Play something." Jack hesitated, then sighed, wiped his hands, and sat on the old piano bench. His fingers hovered for a moment. Then, like muscle memory laced with memory itself, he began to play. A gentle tune. Not flashy, just honest. The kind of melody a man plays when he doesn't need to impress anyone, only remember who he once was. Vivian watched him with a kind of reverence, not for his skill, though he played beautifully, but for the way he became someone else as he did. Softer, unburdened. Ruby leaned into her mother's side. Yes, Mother. That's what Vivian felt like in that moment. Not just a guardian or protector, but part of something that breathed and laughed and dared to begin again. That evening, Beckett sent a message. Jack found Vivian in the hallway near the nursery. "He wants to proceed," Jack said. "A controlled stimulation plan. A mix of light therapy, guided movement, and multisensory reinforcement." Vivian nodded. "What's the timeline?" 3 months, Jack said. "Maybe longer. But he believes we can move forward." Vivian looked toward the playroom where giggles erupted from behind the door. 3 months, she whispered. "I've waited 7 years. What's 3 more? Jack's voice was quiet. "They're going to remember this season, no matter how it ends." Vivian looked at him. "So will I." They stood there, unspoken words between them, the kind that only 2 people with broken pasts can fully understand. That night, as stars pressed gently against the windows, Jack sat beside Ruby's bed. She looked up sleepily. "Do you think they'll really see Daddy?" He brushed her hair back. "I think they already do. Just not the way the world expects." Ruby yawned. "I like it here." "I do too." She rolled over, hugging Sergeant Wiggles close. "I hope we stay." Jack didn't answer right away. Then finally he whispered, "So do I." In her own room, Vivian sat on the edge of her bed, holding a folded note in her hands, one the girls had scribbled earlier with Ruby's help. It simply said, "Thank you for letting us see," followed by 3 tiny stick figures holding hands. Vivian pressed the paper to her chest, and for the first time in years, she cried not from pain, but from hope, too big to hold in silence. Vivian Hale sat in the study long after the sun had dipped beneath the trees. The mansion was quiet, save for the soft rustling of wind outside and the occasional creak of the floorboards, old wood shifting with night air. Her teacup sat untouched beside a folder thick with printed pages, notes, and images. The words on the top sheet read, "Phase 1, Sensory Reinforcement Therapy Proposal, Dr. Lorne Beckett. Confidential. She had read it twice, then a third time, but the decision didn't live in the ink. It lived in her chest, where fear had long since built a home. It wasn't a decision about science. It was about faith. Not religious faith, but that deeper, quieter kind, believing in what couldn't yet be seen. Ellie and Sophie were happy. For the first time in years, they were more than content. They were curious, brave, open. Did she risk disrupting that with more intervention? More tests, even gentle ones? Or did she risk doing nothing, letting this moment pass, never knowing what might have been possible? She closed the folder. Then she stood. She found Jack in the greenhouse watering the mint plants Ruby had insisted on planting near the tomatoes. He looked up as she approached Jose in hand. Sleeves rolled up dirt smudged on his forearm. "You're working late," she said softly. "They were drooping," he replied. "Couldn't let them give up overnight." Vivian folded her arms. "Is that what you do?" "Jack. Keep things from giving up." He smiled faintly. "When I can." She stepped closer. The glass panels above them reflected stars. Her voice dropped. "I've made a decision." Jack set the hose aside and wiped his hands. "I'm listening." "We'll do it," she said. "The therapy plan, the light training, everything." Jack nodded, not with triumph, but with quiet respect. "I think it's the right choice." Vivian hesitated. "But there's one condition." "Okay. I want you there. Every session. Every moment. Not as a technician. Not even as a janitor. As family." Jack blinked. "I know that sounds premature," she added quickly. "But they trust you. And they follow you. And frankly," her voice softened, "so do I." Jack said nothing at first, then stepped toward her. "I'm not going anywhere," he said gently. "Not unless you ask me to." She looked up at him. There was something unsaid between them, but neither reached for it. "Not yet." Instead, she whispered, "Then let's begin." The next day, preparations began. The sunroom was converted into a sensory training space. Soft mats were laid out. Curtains filtered the light to adjustable levels. Mirrors were installed low, harmless, shatterproof. Music speakers embedded into the floor played specific tones, mapped to visual stimuli. Dr. Beckett returned with a calm urgency that filled the staff with purpose. But he never took over. He only guided. Jack was there every morning, helping set the rhythm, gentle lights, in the morning wind chimes, in the afternoon, warm lanterns in the evening. And always, Ruby was nearby, leading with joy. On the third day of training, during a routine exercise, something remarkable happened. Vivian watched from behind the glass wall as Sophie stood in front of a large, illuminated panel. Dr. Beckett called out, "Follow the light, Sophie. Only if you feel it." The light pulsed from left to right. Sophie's chin twitched. Her hand raised, tentative, unsure. And then she stepped sideways, slowly, following the beam. Vivian covered her mouth with both hands. Beckett made a note calmly. But Jack looked through the glass at Vivian, and for the first time her eyes filled with tears. That night, as the girls slept peacefully in their shared room, Vivian wandered out to the front veranda. Jack was already there, leaning against the column, arms folded. He didn't turn as she approached. He just said, "She tracked it. Not by sound, not by memory, by light." Vivian nodded. "I saw." "You okay?" She hesitated. "No, but also." "Yes." Jack smiled. "That sounds about right." They stood in silence, the cool air wrapping around them like a thin blanket. "Do you think this will last?" she asked finally. "The progress, no, this!" Her voice cracked. The laughter, the closeness, the part of me that feels like a mother again. Jack turned toward her. "You never stopped being one." Vivian looked up, eyes wet. "I did. Inside. I went through motions. But I shut something off. And now it's coming back and I'm terrified. Jack took a step closer, slow, steady. Good, he said. Only brave people admit fear. Their hands brushed just for a second, enough to know, but not yet enough to say it aloud. Later that night, Vivian placed a small notebook at the edge of her desk, the one Jack had used for weeks. She had found it left open on the counter, pages filled with notes and drawings. She added one line in her handwriting, "Let's follow the light." Together, she closed the book and turned off the lamp. The morning air was unusually still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Vivian stood beside Jack in the glass sunroom, hands clasped tightly in front of her, watching as Dr. Beckett made final adjustments to the ambient lighting system. Today wasn't just another therapy session. It was the session. The one they had been building toward for nearly 8 weeks. No machines, no hospital gowns, no sterile walls. Just a soft beam of warm light projected across the room like a golden path, a trail that only the brave would follow. Sophie sat on the floor mat, her back straight, her hands resting gently on her knees. Ellie stood behind her, one hand on her sister's shoulder. Ruby knelt beside them, whispering encouragements in the same sing-song voice she'd used since day one. Jack had taught her that how the smallest rhythms of familiarity can be more powerful than medicine. Vivian whispered, "What if it doesn't work?" Jack didn't look away from the scene before them. "Then we keep dancing anyway." Dr. Beckett stepped forward, calm as ever. "Sophie," he said softly, "you know the light, don't you?" "Yes," she said. "It's going to move now. Just a little. If you feel it, let yourself follow it. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you." Sophie nodded. Beckett gave Jack a small signal. Jack dimmed the sidelights, allowing only the guided beam to remain a soft, warm ray beginning near Sophie's feet and gently sweeping across the floor. Sophie blinked. Vivian felt her own body tense. Sophie's chin tilted, her lips parted just barely. The light moved again. Sophie's eyes followed. Not her head, not her ears. Her eyes. Vivian gasped. Sophie reached one hand forward, fingers brushing the beam not randomly but intentionally. Her brows furrowed, as if she were concentrating, not just feeling. Dr. Beckett murmured, "Again." Jack adjusted the angle slightly. The light swept in a crescent arc. This time, Sophie rose to her feet. She stood wobbling just slightly, then took one step, then another. Ellie reached out but paused, frozen between fear and awe. Then Sophie whispered something, so quiet it was almost missed. "I see it." Vivian pressed both hands to her face, eyes flooding. Sophie turned slowly toward the sound of Ruby's laughter, and then, without being guided, Sophie stepped toward it. When she reached her, she stopped, lifted both arms, and hugged her. Not by guess, by sight. Ruby burst into tears, holding her friend tightly. "You saw me. You saw me." Vivian stumbled back into Jack's arms, sobbing freely. Not the composed kind, not the gentle kind. The kind of sobbing that comes when something inside you breaks free after years of silent captivity. Jack held her without words. She didn't need any. That night, the house buzzed with quiet celebration. The girls decorated their room with paper lanterns and ribbons. The staff baked a small cake vanilla with blueberry stars, just as Ruby once described it. Music played from an old record player in the parlor. Sophie's sight wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. She could see shapes, motion, light. She could see faces. At dinner, she turned to Jack and said, "Your eyes are kind, and your hair looks like chocolate spaghetti." Everyone laughed. Ellie chimed in. "Well, what about me?" Sophie beamed. "You look like my forever." Vivian excused herself, then not because she was overwhelmed, but because she wanted to remember the sound of their laughter without interruption. She stepped into the courtyard, the night cool and full of promise. A moment later, Jack joined her. "They're going to remember today," he said. Vivian nodded. "So will I." They stood side by side, gazing up at the stars. "She's not fully there yet," Vivian said, "but it's enough." Jack looked at her gently. "You're allowed to call it a miracle." Vivian smiled. "I think I'll just call it grace." Silence wrapped around them like a shawl. Then slowly she reached for his hand. Not by accident, not by impulse, by choice. Back inside, the girls climbed into bed. Ruby tucked between the twins, like a bridge of light. Vivian sat beside them and read a story, aloud, not out of obligation, but out of joy. When she finished, Sophie tugged on her sleeve. Mommy Vivian looked down. Sophie whispered, "Will I wake up tomorrow and still see Vivian?" Blinked. Her throat tightened. She gently stroked her daughter's hair and said, "Maybe yes, maybe a little more. But no matter what, I will always be here, and I will always believe in what you can become." Sophie smiled sleepily. "Even if I close my eyes again," Vivian leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Especially then." Later, as Jack turned off the last light in the hallway, he saw something at his door, a small envelope. Inside it was a note written in delicate handwriting. She saw her friend first. "That tells me everything I need to know. Stay." V. He closed the door behind him and sat on the edge of the bed. A veteran, a janitor, a father, and now something more. It was Ruby's idea. She'd sketched it with a crayon on the back of a grocery list, then taped it to Jack's toolbox like it was a master blueprint. In scribbled pink and blue letters, it read, "Dance party under the big tree. For Sophie and Ellie. No adults allowed. Unless they're awesome." Vivian had laughed when Jack showed it to her. "Guess we better start being awesome," he'd said, grinning. And so, 2 days later, as the early evening sun stretched long golden fingers across the Hale estate, preparations began. The maple tree stood tall in the center of the courtyard, its branches reaching like a cathedral roof. Beneath it, Jack and Ruby had strung paper lanterns, soft orbs of pastel light that swayed gently in the warm breeze. The garden twinkled with fairy lights, woven through hedges. White folding chairs circled a small cleared space, marked with chalk and rose petals. A portable speaker sat on a crate nearby, preloaded with a playlist labeled "Songs That Make You Spin." Vivian watched it all unfold from the stone veranda, barefoot and speechless. She had hosted galas for world leaders, charity auctions at art museums, fashion weeks in Milan. But she had never seen anything more beautiful than this, because this wasn't grand. It was real. A celebration not of success, but of survival, of light, of little victories. Sophie was the first to arrive, led by Ruby, and dressed in a soft yellow dress that fluttered like sunshine around her legs. Ellie followed in lavender, giggling, her hair braided with daisy chains. When Jack entered wearing a button-down shirt Ruby had forced him to iron twice, the girls burst into applause. "Dad," Ruby shouted, "you're officially awesome." Just now, he asked. "We had doubts," Sophie said, grinning. Vivian arrived moments later in a crimson summer dress that made Jack's throat tighten. He had seen her strong, he had seen her soft. But tonight, she was simply radiant. Vivian knelt beside the girls and whispered, "Tonight, you dance however you want, however you feel. There are no wrong steps under this tree." Ellie took her hand. "Even if we fall, especially then," Vivian replied. The music began with a slow waltz, something old strings, and piano, warm and golden. Ruby led the first dance, twirling Sophie and Ellie one by one, careful to keep her voice steady with the rhythm. Jack watched from a few steps away, his heart in his throat. Sophie turned, and for the second time that week, her eyes found him. She smiled, not blindly, not vaguely, but at him. He stepped forward, extended a hand. She took it. They began to sway slowly, her small feet uncertain but trusting. Vivian stood near the edge of the pedals, hands trembling. Ellie turned to her and said, "You should dance too." Vivian laughed gently. "It's been a long time." Ellie tilted her head. "But the music's nice now." Vivian looked across the clearing at Jack, who met her eyes, and nodded once, no pressure, just invitation. So she stepped forward. And just like that, Vivian Hale, the woman once known for command and caution, placed her hand in Jack Morrison's calloused palm and let herself be led. They danced, beneath the maple tree, to the music of laughter, of healing of children who had once lived in darkness. After a while, the music faded, replaced by stars and stories. The children sprawled on a quilted blanket, trading secrets and sky shapes. Jack and Vivian sat on the edge of the dance space, bare feet in the grass, breaths quiet. "She's changed," Vivian whispered. Jack nodded. "She's seeing more than light. Do you think it will last?" "I think what's important already," Hezi said. "Confidence, courage, connection. That doesn't go away." Vivian looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "You could leave tomorrow. You've done what no one else could." Jack turned to her, voice low. "Is that what you want?" She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "I want you to stay, not because I need your help, but because I need you." Jack didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached over and took her hand, and they sat that way, hand in hand, while the girls laughed beneath the stars. Later that night, after the girls had been carried to bed and the garden had gone still, Jack found Vivian in the kitchen, rinsing out glasses by the sink. She looked over her shoulder. "I never thought something so small could feel like a holiday." Jack leaned against the doorframe. "That's the thing about light, it doesn't always arrive as fireworks. Sometimes it's just someone reaching for your hand." Vivian dried her hands and turned to him. "No one's ever reached for mine quite the way you have." Jack crossed the room slowly. He stopped in front of her, close enough to feel her breath. "I wasn't looking for anything when I came here," he said. Vivian smiled. "But you found everything, didn't you?" He nodded. Then, with the gentlest touch, he kissed her forehead. Not rushed, not claiming, just reverent. A promise. That night, Vivian wrote in her journal for the first time in years. "Today my daughters danced with the stars, and I danced with someone who reminded me that healing is not a destination. It's a rhythm, a choice. And tonight, I chose joy." Autumn came softly that year. Not with bluster or rain, but with golden afternoons that stretched long into dusk, and leaves that whispered down from the maple tree like tiny copper-colored blessings. It had been 3 months since Sophie first saw Ruby's face. Since then, the world had widened. The girls now recognized colors, not just warmth or shape, but actual colors. They couldn't describe them all yet, but they could point. Could laugh when Ruby wore her mismatched socks. Could marvel at the way sunlight sparkled on pond water. Dr. Beckett returned every few weeks, each time scribbling fewer notes and smiling a little more. "This isn't just progress," he said on his last visit. "It's personal transformation." Vivian asked him once if he'd ever seen a recovery like this. "No," he admitted. "But I've seen what love and consistency can do. And you have both." The Hale estate no longer felt like a house of silence. It echoed now with footsteps, with chalk drawings on walkways, with Jack's low singing when he made pancakes on Sundays. Even the staff walked differently, a bit lighter, a bit slower, as if afraid they might miss something beautiful. One morning, Ellie burst into the kitchen wearing Ruby's oversized rain boots and declared, "I want to be a meteorologist when I grow up." "Why's that?" Jack asked, flipping a pancake. "So I can tell people when the good kind of rain is coming." Vivian leaned against the doorway, arms folded, eyes wet. "That's the kind we waited for," she whispered. Jack nodded. And it came. Vivian had changed, too. She still ran her foundation, still signed checks and gave speeches. But now when she traveled, she always brought the girls. And Jack. And Ruby. They weren't just a household anymore. They were a family. One crisp Sunday, as wind tickled the maple leaves and sunlight danced across the lawn, the family sat outside for breakfast under the pergola. Ruby braided Sophie's hair. Jack taught Ellie how to whittle her name into a piece of driftwood. Vivian sipped her coffee and watched it all, a quiet warmth in her chest. She turned to Jack. "I never asked," she said, "if you'd ever thought about staying." "Long term," Jack raised an eyebrow. "You mean here?" Vivian smiled. "I mean with us." He set down the carving knife and looked at her, not with surprise, but with certainty. "I've already stayed," he said. "The only thing left is to say it out loud." Vivian reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was one of Ruby's drawings. Stick figures under a tree, a tall man, a woman with a big red heart, 3 girls holding hands, and a small dog with a crooked tail. "We found this in Sophie's drawer," Vivian said. She called it Our Forever Day. Jack stared at the drawing for a long time. Then he looked up at her, voice low. "Let's make it official." 2 months later, under the same maple tree, surrounded by fallen leaves and fairy lights, they held a small ceremony. No press, no fanfare, just family. Ruby was the flower girl, of course, though she threw confetti instead of petals. Ellie carried a ribbon-wrapped lantern. Sophie read a poem she'd written herself, haltingly, nervously, but with joy. Jack and Vivian didn't exchange traditional vows. They made promises. "I promise to never fix what isn't broken. I promise to stay even when the lights go out. I promise to believe in small miracles, especially the kind with freckles and paper stars." They kissed beneath the rustling branches, and the girls cheered like fireworks. Even Sergeant Wiggles got a flower crown. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep in a pile on the living room couch, half buried under blankets and storybooks, Jack carried each one to bed, pausing each time to press a kiss to their forehead. When he returned, he found Vivian sitting at the piano. She looked up and smiled. "Play with me." He sat beside her, their shoulders touched. Together they played, not for an audience, but for the house, the stars, and each other. After a moment, Jack spoke softly. "You think they'll remember all this?" Vivian looked toward the dark hallway, where giggles had once echoed in fear, now silent in peace. "I hope they don't remember it all," she said, "just the way it made them feel." Jack nodded. Safe and seen. As the night deepened, Jack stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking out across the moonlit lawn. Vivian joined him, slipping her hand into his. "We did it," she said. "No," Jack replied. "They did it. We just kept showing up." Vivian rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you think this is what healing really looks like?" Jack thought for a moment. "No. I think it looks different for everyone. But for me," he tightened his arm around her, "it looks like this." Later in his notebook, the one now shared between them, he wrote the final entry. "They don't chase the light anymore. They carry it. They hold it. And maybe, just maybe, so do I." The garden was greener. The girls were taller. Sophie now read aloud to Ellie. Ellie could ride a bike, fast and fearless. Ruby had adopted a dog she named Moondrop and taught him to sit, roll over, and howl to the tune of Twinkle Twinkle. Jack taught woodworking classes at the local community center. Vivian launched a new initiative through her foundation, one focused not on fixing children, but on helping them believe in their potential. and once a month under the maple tree, the family danced. Sometimes in the sun, sometimes in the rain, but always in the light. The kind that stays. We'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Whether it's a quiet town, a big city, or somewhere in between. Tell us in the comments. This little corner of the internet is full of kind souls, and your voice matters here. If this story touched your heart, and you believe in the power of love, hope, and second chances, please consider subscribing. It's free, and it helps us bring more healing stories to life. From all of us here, thank you for spending your time with us today. Take care of yourself and remember, even in the darkest moments, miracles can begin with a single act of kindness.